Hi, I'm Dan Stuber. I'm going to introduce Richie Rosencrance, our speaker for this evening. Well, good evening, everybody here in the OMSI Planetarium and all you at home, wherever you might be in the ether. I can't see where you are, but I know you're out there. I'm happy to introduce Richie tonight. Richie is a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Nevada, Reno, and an instructor at the Archaeology Field School run by the Museum of Natural and Cultural History at the University of Oregon. His research focuses broadly on hunter-gatherer technological innovation in the deep past, lithic technology, chronology building, lithic procurement strategies, and the archaeology of the Great Basin and Columbia Plateau. Richie is a very prolific author and has written and co-authored many papers and book chapters. He is the editor, along with Caitlin McDonough and Jordan Pratt, of a new volume titled Current Perspectives on Stemmed and Fluted Point Technologies in the American Far West. It's being published by the University of Utah Press and due to be out this coming March. Richie's talk this evening is 12,000 Years of Technology at Cougar Mountain Cave, Oregon. Please give a warm OAS welcome to Richie Rosencrance.
Thanks, Dan. Let's get this started here. I can't say I've ever presented in a planetarium before, but maybe this is the start of a long career. You need that sound at the movies, like. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll try not to scream into this mic. I'm pretty loud. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to be speaking to OAS once again. And tonight I'm going to be talking about 12,600 years of technology at Cougar Mountain Cave. Let's just situate ourselves where Cougar Mountain Cave is, where we are. That's, if you guys can see, that's us up here in Portland. And down here in Central Oregon is our red star is Cougar Mountain Cave. And Cougar Mountain Cave is in a very prominent part of Central Oregon with some really well-known sites very nearby that you guys have probably heard of. One of which, oh, whoa. Okay, sorry, excuse me. The first of which is Paisley Caves, which is about 80 or 90 miles to the south, where we have some of the earliest evidence of people in North America at 14,000 years ago. We have stemmed projectile points at 13,000 years ago, and then a long record of people there as well, up until, pretty much contact. Just to the west of Cougar Mountain Cave is Fort Rock Cave, which I'm sure you've all heard of, which was the first place that Fort Rock sandals were identified and are still the oldest directly dated footwear in the world, about 10,500 years ago. You can see Fort Rock Cave from Cougar Mountain Cave and vice versa, if you know what you're looking at. And then just to the south of Cougar Mountain Cave is a site really near and dear to my heart, which is a big part of my ongoing research, is the Conley Caves, where we have recurrent occupations beginning about 12,600 years ago, similar to Cougar Mountain Cave, up until about past contact. We recently found some glass trade beads there, so we know people were there post-contact as well. And we have a really interesting early record at Conley Caves that jives really well with Cougar Mountain Cave, and this is why I bring it up. We have a lot of really delicate odd bone needles dating to the late Pleistocene, somewhere between about 12,600 and 11,700. We have really good evidence for early seed use, some of the earliest, strongest plant use in deep time in North America. And I bring all of these up because these four sites are all part of the same picture when throughout time and through the past. Starting as some of the earliest people in the region up past contact, and they kind of tell a different story, different parts of the same story. But let's look at Cougar Mountain Cave a little more specifically, right? So this is Cougar Mountain Cave in about 2018 or 2019, a photo taken by my friend Brent McGregor. And as you can see here, this is a map of the Great Basin. This is the outline of the hydrographic Great Basin, and Cougar Mountain Cave is way, way up here in the most northwest basin in the Fort Rock Basin. Just to kind of situate you where we're talking about, it's kind of the borderlands of the Great Basin and the Columbia Plateau, and that's reflected in the fauna, the plants, and people's lifeways. And where Cougar Mountain Cave is and Fort Rock Basin is in generally are the ancestral lands of the Klamath, Modoc, and Northern Paiute people, and who are currently members of the Klamath tribes, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Burns Paiute, and the Fort Bidwell Indian community. And I'm very grateful to all of them for all of our ongoing research on their homelands. Cougar Mountain Cave has a pretty complicated history, and one that some of you might know a little something about, or maybe not. But it was originally excavated by a man from Rainier, Oregon, not too far from here, named John Cowles in 1958, and that's him there on the left. That's a picture from a self-published book that we're going to kind of see some excerpts from. He excavated this by himself over the course of, I forget the exact amount of days, over the course of a few weeks, kind of broken up. And then there's a second excavation in 1966 that's much less well known. This was excavated by Thomas Layton, who was then a master's student at the University of California, Davis. That's him there in the front. Tom's still around. Tom lives in San Jose, California, and he's been really great to talk about all of this work and their impetus for why they went there. And if anyone knows anything about Great Basin archaeology, you've probably heard of David Hurst Thomas. And if you haven't, you just go on tonight and Google. But that's him right there in the back. He told me this was his first ever archaeological experience working with Tom Layton at Cougar Mountain Cave. And so John Cowles was an avocationalist, and he really, he did not employ standard archaeological methods even for the day, and especially not by today's standards. But Cowles was really savvy enough to realize that what he found was really special. And through that, he produced this, which was a self-published book titled Cougar Mountain Cave in South Central Oregon. And if you know anything about Cougar Mountain Cave, this is probably what you've seen. And in this book, he details kind of what I'm going to show you tonight, just different categories of materials that he found, and he recounts where he remembers finding these. And we've kind of gained a little bit of information from Tom Layton of how he recounted this stuff. But I like to give him credit for putting this out in a book, putting it out in the world, and having a record of what he found, because most essentially looted rock shelters anywhere don't have these sorts of records. So we're lucky to have this. During this time, this was a pretty well-known thing that happened, and I tend to think that John Cowles must have known someone in the newspaper or someone in media, because there was a lot of stories about his work there, and I'm guessing is kind of promotion for his book when it was coming out. And a friend of mine, Matt Skeels, he's really good at digging up old newspaper articles about caves in Oregon, and he sent me all of these, and none of these really gave us anything new that we didn't know, but it really did give me a different perspective that the local community, this caught the attention of the local community, and they were aware of what John had done. This site also caught the attention of archaeologists at the time, particularly people interested in the earliest record of people in the Great Basin. In particular, these large stemmed projectile points here you're seeing these big pictures of. We call these Hasket now, but when John Cowles excavated this, that name had never been talked about and never been defined. They just kind of knew these as big stem points. And this was one of the first times that these types of artifacts were found in a buried context, and gave us kind of the sense of these are really old compared to what we see in other archaeological sites. But another really special thing about Cougar Mountain Cave, and that's what we're really going to talk about tonight, is the organic assemblage. So things made of wood, bone, and particularly fiber items. And these sorts of materials are the rarest in the archaeological record, especially items like these slides here of these wooden artifacts. These are almost never preserved in archaeological sites, even in caves and rock shelters. And just before moving on, a really fun story about these pictures you're seeing are the color images of the original slides from the 1950s that are in Cowles' book. And I have these because an acquaintance of me and my research team found these at a garage sale and looked at them and was like, oh my goodness, these are the original slides and he purchased them, and we were able to digitize them. And I have a lot more of them, but I don't want to spoil my own pictures that I have to show you guys. So just there's all these cool little stories about this research that I really like to share with you. So as I mentioned, cows didn't really, record things like we do today. He did in less than a few weeks what would take us 10 years to do nowadays, in the detail in which we record things. But Cowles recounts in his book things in kind of 1 foot levels, as he called them. And this is kind of the stratigraphic profile here that you're seeing that he produced. This pumice, at the time they thought that was an eruption from Newberry, but it turns out that was Mount Mazama or Crater Lake, which we now know is 7,600 years old. But I've provided this to kind of give you guys an idea of whenever you look at his book, you see all these amazing things that he found at Cougar Mountain Cave. That's really all you know. You know that they came from Cougar Mountain Cave, and then you have to look at the little details that he says underneath pictures. And these are kind of some quotes from, just to kind of give you a sense of the sort of provenience we have. So all 3 were in a small crevice, 12 inches from the bottom, or from the top. All the buffalo bones were located in the bottom 2 feet. All, or my favorite, all were from below pumice, which is very precise. And so this isn't ideal, right? Nowadays we would have a 3-point plot of where this came from in space. But this gives us a basis and a starting point to really test or kind of evaluate where things came from. So he said it came from here, so this could be around this old, right? And this really gets to the crux of what I'm going to be talking to you guys about tonight, which is reconstructing the chronology of Cougar Mountain Cave. And we've done this through its really unique organic assemblage. But before that, I want to mention some of Tom Layton's excavations too, because Tom Layton told me this great story that when he was a young graduate student in the early 1960s at an SAA meeting, B. Robert Butler, who was a prominent archaeologist in Idaho, and Luther Cressman, who is obviously, or if you know anything about Oregon archaeology, prominent archaeologist here in Oregon. Tom Layton saw them get into this heated argument at this session about the age of those stemmed projectile points that I showed you a picture of. And he said it was this heated exchange of them berating one another from each of their positions. And Tom, being the studious graduate student at the time, thought of Cougar Mountain Cave. And he remembered this sequence of these materials from the bottom to the top, starting with the stem points and ending with the arrow points that we know today. And during that period, there was this new method that we use widely today called obsidian hydration dating. And Tom was one of the first in the first wave of archaeologists to really start employing this. And so he got this idea as a graduate student to go to Cougar Mountain Cave, excavate some undisturbed deposits, get some radiocarbon dates, and then do obsidian hydration on the artifacts to essentially do what we're doing now, but through a different method. And so they went and excavated inside of the cave and outside of the cave. And these are kind of just some of the pictures that Tom still had from the 1960s to show us. And unfortunately, most of what Tom Layton and his team excavated, you can see here, especially these units here in the back of the cave, were all disturbed. And, reading through Cowles' descriptions, and I poured through all of Tom's crew's notes, there was this one unit, this S14 unit, that they talk about getting to this certain depth, and they describe the soil or the sediment in a particular way that really jibed with what it sounded like Cowles encountered. He talks about things being damp in the bottom. The sandals had wet mud on them in the bottom of the cave. And the excavators talked about this lower part they found a cigarette butt, and then below the cigarette butt, they started finding this kind of damp, dark red soil, as they described it. And so they had some sediment samples, and to spoil the thing here is we radiocarbon dated some of that charcoal to the late Pleistocene, and showing that they did probably encounter a little bit of undisturbed deposits. And that research was in 2019, and one of the first new sets of radiocarbon dates to ever come from Cougar Mountain Cave. And one more thing, just to shout out to my friend Tom Layton, is Tom Layton is very, very good at keeping records. And he has boxes and boxes of letters and correspondence going all the way back into the 1960s. And he went through all of those and created this document that he gave to me and Jeff Smith at UNR, which is he copied all of his letters and his exchanges with John Cowles during those days because he borrowed Cowles' collections with the landowners and anyone else. Anything he had to do with Cougar Mountain Cave, he put together in this appendix, and it actually generates some really important information about the site that we didn't have. For instance, it told us that John Cowles started on the east and worked in non-systematic cuts back and forth across the cave. And we also learned from this correspondence that Cowles recounted these, the locations of these items months after he had excavated. And so, which tells you that maybe we should question some of these provenience assessments that he had, or at least approach them with a sense of caution. And so this is just a perfect example of don't throw away all your stuff. Okay. And so there has been some previous work at Cougar Mountain Cave, but most of what's came before what I'm presenting tonight has really focused on the stone tools. Lindsay Lafayette, for her master's thesis, looked at use-wear on some of the stem points. My friend Sophia Jamalden sourced a bunch of the stem points to understand where they were getting their obsidian from. Tom Layton, of course, did his original obsidian hydration study in 1972. And then this 2019 paper is what I just mentioned, us dating a piece of charcoal and some textiles from the back dirt that Tom Layton's crew recovered. But even with all this research, this barely scratched the surface of what we can do with Cougar Mountain Cave. And in particular, what really undermines all of this and any incorporation of Cougar Mountain Cave into the broader records is we don't know how old things are. We just know there is hundreds of fiber and wooden artifacts from it. And so it really limits our ability to understand Cougar Mountain Cave and how it fits into our broader picture, which is the whole impetus for this research I'm talking about tonight. And my name is the only name on this title slide tonight, but all of these people here are collaborators on this project. It's probably one of the coolest teams I've ever been a part of. Everyone brings their respective expertise to this. We have fiber experts, radiocarbon experts, Oregon archaeological experts. And I just want to emphasize that this is our research, but I didn't want to fill up a whole title slide with everyone's names. So shout out to all my collaborators. They're really great people. I think you've probably heard from a few of them, and your very own Dan Stuber is one of them. So we set out to reconstruct the chronology of Cougar Mountain Cave for itself, but also to compare it to broader records. And I'm about to get into our results and take you through this story, but I just want to put a note on talk about radiocarbon dating and how far radiocarbon dating has come. So in the 1960s, I believe, B. Robert Butler borrowed a sandal from Cowles to radiocarbon date it in these early days of radiocarbon dating. It was the first decade of radiocarbon dating, and it took almost a complete sandal to get a radiocarbon date in those days, right? And today we can pre-treat our materials, and we can get radiocarbon dates off of things as small as this. This is a dime, if you can't really tell. This is 1.3 milligrams of charcoal and 1.8 milligrams of sagebrush bark, and both of these I've gotten radiocarbon dates from. So just to show you how minimally invasive this technique is. It is destructive. We turn this into gas and then measure the atoms in the gas, but it really takes almost nothing. And it makes it ideal for a situation like this at Cougar Mountain Cave, where we have all of these fiber items, but no sense of really where they fit in relation to one another or in absolute time. And here is a fancy radiocarbon graph that I won't dwell on too long, but this is the current chronology of Cougar Mountain Cave. This is 210 radiocarbon dates. This is called a sum probability distribution, but all it really is a way to show if you put all these dates together, the peaks represent higher probabilities, so generally more radiocarbon dates, and then the troughs and the empty spots where there's no dates. And so you can see this starts about 12,600 years ago, as my title implies, and goes to about 500 years ago. And you can see that, yes, there is something that's 12,600 years old, and then there's something that's 500 years old, but it's not a constant record, right? There's these hiatuses. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this presentation is take you through some of these key kind of peaks. I've kind of grouped these into these occupation periods, if you will. So this collection is the largest collection of Pleistocene cordage anywhere in the Americas. I know It sounds like I'm being hyperbolic, but I just have to point that out. The second closest is Paisley Caves, which is a close second. And then there's a few pieces of cordage in the Eastern Great Basin, and then a few in South America. So again, just highlighting how special and unique Cougar Mountain Cave is itself. Okay. This was a big surprise for us. John Cowles mentioned nothing about any of these items in his book, and we just knew that they were wooden items that serve some sort of purpose. And lo and behold, all of these came back in excess of 12,000 years ago. And talking with Dan and some of our other collaborators, we tried to figure out what these might be. And this is our best guess. And we think these are parts of deadfall traps. And this is an example of the classic Paiute deadfall, which the Paiutes taught settlers how to create these. This consists of 4 pieces of wood and a little bit of cordage. And I'm particularly confident about these triggers, which is this little bit that goes right here that the bait stick pulls, and it pulls out, and the deadfall falls and kills a little mouse or maybe a small rabbit. And we know small game is a big part of Great Basin people's lives. And I think this makes total sense that we have evidence of traps going back into the Pleistocene. And just an example of how relatively quote unquote simple this technology is, you need a little bit of string and 4 sticks. The construction of this is complex and takes lots of planning and know-how. It's just to say that you don't need really fancy sticks to make a quality deadfall trap. We're rounding out some of our items from the late Pleistocene. These are some of my favorite items from the site, especially on the far left there as a big bundle of sagebrush bark. That is raw material gathered, tied together, and stashed at the site over 12,000 years ago. We have these 3 pieces of twine matting, which is just a technique in which to twine things. And this pushes back twining 3,000 years. And we have continuous evidence of Klamath, Modoc, and Paiute people twining going back 12,000 years ago up past contact, right? Really special. And we had no idea how old these were going to be either. So total surprises. And this piece of wood here, I'm just going to point out, if anyone has any ideas of what this might be, come talk to me, because we don't know. Now, I mentioned that Cowles talked about buffalo bones were only found in the bottom 2 feet. And so I expected most all of the bison bones that he kept to date to that period. And we did get a lot. So we've got hoof sheaths, some horn cores, all of this going back 12,000 years ago. And our friendly bison here. And there's no clear evidence that these are culturally modified, but I'm pretty sure they are. Right. So we're going to do a lot more research on these, hopefully doing stable isotopes to understand what the bison were eating, maybe the ranges in which they were moving. There's also a bunch of bison teeth, which are even better for things like that, stable isotope analysis. So stay tuned for future bison research from the Fort Rock Basin, because we also have a lot of bison and elk from the nearby Conley Caves that's going to tell us a really interesting picture. And now this is some of the stuff I've never included in a presentation about Cougar Mountain Cave. These, back to those stem points that I talked all about at the beginning of this presentation. These are Haskett points. And I know these date to the late Pleistocene because this is the topic of my master's thesis. And I synthesized all of the sites in the Great Basin and Plateau and found that these only date to the Pleistocene. And these are beautiful examples of Haskett points from Cougar Mountain Cave, because Cougar Mountain Cave is also an obsidian source. Cougar Mountain obsidian is a high quality, very abundant obsidian, and there are tremendous amounts of stone tools at Cougar Mountain Cave for that reason. I also am pretty confident they date to this time frame because at the Conley Caves, found less than a day's walk, we also have many, many Haskett points dating to the late Pleistocene that jives perfectly with all of those artifacts from the late Pleistocene that I just showed you. And these are just kind of some of the examples. And I bet you are going to guess what the most prominent obsidian source at the Conley Caves is. Cougar Mountain, found less than a day's walk away. And it's kind of hard to tell here, but this Haskett point here in the middle, which is from Cougar Mountain Cave, this is made on a dacite or a fine grain volcanic that occurs at the Conley Caves. So I really think that these 2 sites I kind of think of them as sister sites. I think literally the same people visited both of these sites probably all through time. And I think that's a really special story to be able to tell. Okay, now out of the Pleistocene and into the Holocene. It's getting warmer. I'm kind of skipping ahead to these big clusters. We have some dates between this 9.7 and 12,000. But these are really the concentrations where we've got from about 9.7 to about 9.5 and 9,000 to about 8.6. So we'll do our older one first and then our younger one. So from about 9,700 to 9,500 years ago, we kind of have a relatively even assemblage. We've got these really amazing wooden foreshafts. Notice, so these would have been on the ends of atlatl darts and would have been the tips of projectiles to kill whatever they were hunting. So notice there's no stone points on the end of them that I admittedly obsess over all the time. These are really old foreshafts. These are some of the only older ones that I've been able to find are from some of the ice patches in Wyoming, and they're only a little bit older. Really, we have some of our earliest use, the second earliest use of dogbane or apocynum in this really fine cordage, probably used for a net. And and this sandal start here, how this is constructed, these warps and these wefts, is the exact way that you start to make a Fort Rock sandal. And Tom Conley and I tend to think that this could be kind of the start of a child sandal. I know it's because it's on the planetarium screen, it looks massive, but it's really the size of my hand. It's very smaller. It's very small. And same with this one. We think both of these are probably the starts of small pads for sandals. And so we kind of, oh yes, this is new too. We have this amazing breechcloth or a belt. Whenever we pulled this out of the case to document it and photograph it, Tom said, wow, because he's never seen anything like it. And that's saying something coming from Tom Conley. And it's super well preserved. Cal says nothing about it. We had no idea. And I would have guessed it was 3,000 years old or so because it's just so well preserved. But alas, it was quite old. And John Counts talks about this. He thinks it's the start of a skirt because we know ethnographically that the Paiutes would make skirts in this particular way made out of sagebrush. But we're not convinced it's necessarily a skirt. But nonetheless, really, you can see this, just kind of clues into how this manufacture begins with this kind of twisted rope and these braids. And they would have taken other pieces of tule and wrapped this way to create a mat. And so we kind of interpret this occupation. It's got this wide range of hunting technology, plant gathering technology, evidence of children. It's probably slightly longer term occupations with the whole family group there. We also have 5 Fort Rock sandals dated to this time frame. I guess 3 date to this early time frame and 2 to the later time frame. There's about 70 Fort Rock sandals at Fort Rock Cave, not very far away, and Cougar Mountain Cave kind of adds to this, especially this one clear on the left, which I love, which is a child sandal. These are adult size. These are child size. Again, just more evidence of children in the record, something we don't talk about enough. And this is clearly some of the evidence for that. Fort Rock sandals. Let's see. Are we working? Clicker's not working.
We've been to Fort Rock.
Okay. Fort Rock sandals are pretty well studied. Thanks to Tom Conley and Pat Barker and some of the other fiber researchers. We now have a record of 46 directly dated Fort Rock sandals from across Oregon and Nevada. You can kind of see their range here on this map. And this red star is Cougar Mountain Cave. And you can kind of see this graph represents kind of the number of cases. So individual dates on individual sandals. And I kind of just placed where these Fort Rock sandals fall into this. So 3 into this main peak, and then we got 2. Interestingly, I actually didn't realize this until I put this graph together for you guys, but we have 2 that are kind of on the later end of Fort Rock sandals. So kind of added this really interesting picture of Fort Rock sandal use starting about 10,500 years ago and dissipating about 8,500 years ago, which at slightly before that, another sandal type starts to appear. So that's another presentation. Again, kind of really leaning on my master's thesis research where I synthesized point types at archaeological sites across the region. These are the ones that we're pretty sure date to this time frame, just post 11,500. We can't say much more than that about these, but these are different styles of the Western stem tradition. Maybe you guys have heard some presentations about. These 2 here, these Cougar Mountain points, you can guess the type is named from this site, and Tom Layton did that with his dissertation work in 1970. So these are the type specimens for the Cougar Mountain type, or 2 of them at least. And And this is not really surprising. I'm going to guess that John Cowles probably left a lot of little broken bases, because that's what we mostly find at archaeological sites, are these really small basal fragments of stem points. And I'm guessing in the back dirt there are many, many of those. Okay, on to our second early Holocene grouping here, where we have an explosion of basketry. I think we have 12 pieces of basketry dating to this time frame. Some of our earliest evidence of closed twining, which is just similar to that earlier twining I was talking about, just a slightly tighter technique, probably used, which could be as tight to be waterproof. Another really special thing is this thing here. This is called a warp face plane weave, which is distinctive from twining. Warp face, these are the only two, there's 2 items from Cougar Mountain Cave of warp face plane weave, and they're the only 2 pieces of warp face plane weave in Oregon, and both post-date the larger group in time by about 2,000 years. All the rest of the examples come from Western Nevada. And so it really goes to show that we think we have all of these patterns figured out with textile technologies, but really the record is super biased, and there's a lot that we still need to learn. So again, just another really special thing about Cougar Mountain Cave are the examples of these warp face plane weave. We also have these really early evidence of dogbane cordage again. These are really fine inner barks of dogbane. We have 4 quids that date to this time frame, which this is one of those other examples we didn't know. And quids are kind of, think of it as sort of like chewing tobacco. It's different plant materials that could be infused. You could put tobacco seeds in there or not. It's a way to curb thirst and curb hunger. It's also recreation. And we found them in the collection, and we're really surprised to see that they're almost 9,000 years old. Oh, yes. And one of my favorite things here in the top is this hafted lithic, and I'd only seen black and white pictures of this, and I thought and Cal says it comes from below Mazama, and he was right. It's older than Mazama. But I'd always thought, I was like, okay, it looks like a cascade point, which you're going to see some pictures of some cascade points here in a minute. But when we looked at it in person, it's actually just a flake, and it's minimally worked. You can see that this little hafting element is really crooked, and it's very thin. And we just don't think it's functional. And so we kind of think this is a kid's toy. And really another kind of highlighting children in the archaeological record. We also have leather dating to this period. And I was thinking that these would be 12,000 years old, but alas, they were not. You can see these kind of holes in this leather on this side. This is where the cordage is stitched into it. Same with this piece here. In and out on both sides. These are opposite faces. You can really see it on this top one. You can see where the fiber cordage goes in and out. And these are, corners of either bags or maybe pieces of clothing. There's no way to really know. But the cordage is dogbane. And so I think these are really amazing just examples of putting these different types of raw materials together in your everyday life, which we know people did. Obviously, but these are just being able to see those details really richly. And we have some bison dating to this time frame. And I hope to do it's called ZooMS analysis on this leather to see what animals the leather came from as well. Okay, now onto some stone tools again. We know, again, from the Conley Caves, I use this as my baseline for Cougar Mountain Cave. This schematic on the right is Conley Cave 5, and this is kind of our sequence that we've worked out. You can see 9,008-4. Those are hearth features that we've directly dated, and we have notch points, some of the earliest notch points in the Great Basin, co-occurring with cascade points. And at Cougar Mountain Cave, we have cascade points, alas, you're seeing here. And then these, and you might ask me, how do I know that these are early? And that is one of our main research topics at Conley Cave, trying to figure this out. But the reason I know this is because Tom Layton hydrated these with obsidian hydration, and they had really large obsidian hydration rinds. And I can't translate that into calendar years, but by all reasonable guesses, these probably are these are the 4 examples of early ones, and maybe there's some others in there that in the future we can hydrate and source and see what they are. And Cowles talks about notch points appearing below Mazama, and these fit pretty well, especially this one. I think this one just screams some of these examples from Cougar Mountain Cave. But stay tuned. Lots of arguments about how to type projectile points that people are going to hate me for, because I'm probably going to give a new name to them. And then I also found these working in the Cougar Mountain Cave collection. These are really anomalous. They're just kind of flakes that are shaped, and then they have these little indented bases. And they were quite perplexing until I remembered some of the things that I've seen from some other sites, especially this year at Conley Caves. We found this one here on the left, and then a rock shelter in Warner Valley called LSP1. We have these from Conley and LSP1 date to about 9,000 years ago. And so I'm betting that, these definitely are not corner notch points, which we know date to the last 7,000 years ago, and they're not stem points that we know are 9,000 and older. So I'm guessing they're somewhere between 9 and 6. And that's pretty rough, but for Cougar Mountain Cave, it's pretty good. Okay. Now we're getting really late in time. The last 3,500 years. This is just between about 3,500 and 2,600 years ago is really, really intensive occupations of Cougar Mountain Cave. You can see we've got a fourth of our entire data set comes from this time frame. This is 58 dates. And these are all on artifacts, direct artifacts. Between about 36 and 3,200, we'll group it in here. Lots and lots and lots of basketry. Catlow twine basketry. This is the exact way that Klamath, Modoc, and Paiute people made basketry at contact and still do today. There's different pieces of cordage. We have some of our first atlatl darts showing up. It doesn't really show up very good, but we've got 3 or 4 clear atlatl darts. This rock with cordage tied on it was maybe a piece of a net weight or something. And then there's a lot of things like this in the collection, which are kind of indiscriminate wooden artifacts, but this is really bashed on the top. And we think this is some sort of stake for, it could, a stake can be used for a lot of different purposes. And we got this little bison horn sheath here as well. This was a big surprise. I was thinking that was going to be late Pleistocene as well. So really wide range of activities represented in this as well. I think this is probably entire family groups here during these periods, simply because there's so much material dating to this time frame. And the types of items, the basketry, the hunting weaponry, the nets, those fit all of the different divisions of labor. This is something that John Cowles didn't talk about in his book, and we didn't really know it was there until we went and looked at the collection. But this is sagebrush cordage twisted around with rabbit fur. And this is exactly how the Paiutes made them at contact and taught us how they made rabbit skin blankets. And this is 3,200 years old. So I think people were making rabbit skin blankets much, much earlier than that, but this is probably one of the only physical examples that we have in the archaeological record. So another really special thing. From 3,000 to 2,600 years old, we got some other sandals. We've got multiple warp sandals. These are really the premier sandal type during this time. We've got pieces of mats. We've got more darts. Some of this rigid open diagonal twine. So this is not, it's not soft. It's like willow wood that's soaked, and it's just not something you see much in Oregon. It's more common in the Lahontan Basin around Western Nevada. So there was 2 pieces of this dating about 2,500 years ago, and just pretty interesting. And this thing at the bottom, this was a mystery object to me until our good friend Dan Stuber came with us to look at it. And I think what he came up with is probably right. So a really common material used in projectile weaponry in the Great Basin is common reed or phragmites. And so it's hollow reed that grows in marshes. And Dan thinks that this would be used to connect 2 pieces of reed. So you put one piece on this side, one piece on this side, and boom, you have an atlatl dart. And I think he's right. So during this time, things are a little more specialized, and we're wondering if these are really more like special task groups. So there's a lot of hunting, limited basketry, and mats. At least that's our working idea right now. And my goodness, there are a lot of Elko points. These are ones that Cowles kept, and you got to remember he was a collector, so he was interested in things that were pretty. And so there's a lot of these really nearly complete ones. And I really like this hafted one. So this is still hafted on a piece of a wooden foreshaft. And really interestingly, it's lashed on with sagebrush bark. When we think about, or at least as I think about points being hafted and lashed, I always think of sinew. So, tendons of artiodactyls or something. But no, this is with sagebrush. And so we're able to directly date this, which is someone who studies projectile point chronologies like me. That's the holy grail. I can directly date a projectile point type. But this fits right in with what we expect for the age of a lot of Elko points to be. There are some northern side notch points at Cougar Mountain Cave, and which northern side notch points are very common in the Fort Rock Basin. But interestingly, we do not have a single northern side notch point at Conley Caves, not one. And we have hundreds of projectile points. And so that's telling us something different about probably resource patches on the landscape just 20 miles apart from each other and where people are going and where they're using it. So that's kind of a topic of further interest. Okay, we're getting really late in time. So now we're going to look at about 1750 to 1400, and then 1700 to about 600 or 800 or so. So really, relatively on the grand scheme of things, the range of materials represented in this time frame is more limited. It's mostly baskets and mats with a few pieces, of cordage and a few pieces of weaponry. And so we kind of interpret this to be, again, maybe more specialized task groups that are coming to the site for plant procurement and processing. I really like this big, this is, let's see, that's 5 centimeters. So this is, like the size of my chest. This is a really big piece of matting. And I really think it's patched with a piece of dogbane cordage. And you can see all it's so tied back together. And there's also here, and then there's also some other patches remnant in it. And you could actually, there was actually seeds still preserved in some of the crevices of these. So really interesting. This is a complete bow, broken in half, and part of an arrow that were found. That was that one quote I had early on, 12 inches below the surface in a crevice in the back. This is what he was referring to. And this is one of the most important things that we've done research on at Cougar Mountain Cave. This is a complete bow, about 1,650 years old, which is the oldest bow, like actual bow in the Great Basin. Though the bow probably predates that a little bit more. It's a whole nother research topic. But really what was really surprising about this is the material that it's made out of. You can see Acer species, so it's probably maple. And in the region, that would mean it would be boxwood elder or Rocky Mountain maple, I think. And neither of those trees grow or have ever grown in the Fort Rock Basin. And so that tells us that this had to either have been made and carried to or traded for from the Klamath Basin to the southwest a few hundred miles away, or the Ochoco Mountains, which are also a few hundred miles away. So big surprise there, and a really interesting look into the past. And again, I'll also point out, notice what this very large arrow, if it hadn't been with this bow, I would have thought it was an atlatl dart. The tip of it is a wooden tipped foreshaft. So no Elko point on, or no Rosegate point on the end of it like we would want. But it goes to show you don't need stone projectile points all the time. And this is actually, I mentioned sinew on that last Elko point. This has sinew holding the foreshaft into the main shaft. Okay, near the end. So between about 1,100 and 800 years ago, we have kind of another similar to that earlier time frame. We've got lots of cordage, a little bit of basketry, another multiple warp sandal. There's not a lot of weaponry, and again, so we think this might be more of a specialized camp with a limited groups at the site. You can see catlow twine. We had catlow twine that was 8,000 years old at the site, and here's 1,000-year-old catlow twine. Same way to construct your baskets. This is another really special thing from Cougar Mountain Cave, and this is a complete digging stick. This is 80 centimeters long, so it's almost 3 feet long. And last spring, we had this ongoing project working with the Klamath tribes where we go out and gather traditional foods. Perry Chalktoot, who's an elder and on the tribal council, tells us about that traditional food, and we kind of share knowledge and get to know one another. and to also generate nutritional information about those plants. But talking to Perry, we went and dug APAS, or Yampa, which is it's a small root, really important to people of the Northern Great Basin. And Perry was talking about, he has his metal digging stick that he has now, and he was like, in ancient times, we would take a long stick and you heat up part of it and you bend the end of it a little bit and then you fire harden it so it's hard. And sure enough, that's exactly what this is. It's 1,000 years old. And as Perry was telling me this, I'm like, he's describing the one from Cougar Mountain Cave, and he did not know about it. So really cool to see. I'm waiting to see what wood this is. I'm waiting on those results, and for a lot of our wooden artifacts. So that's like a whole nother facet of this. I can't wait to do a whole paper on is the paleoethnobotany of the site and the plants and woods they were using. And then we have this really large arrow point assemblage. I'm just kidding. This is very small. There's only 4 arrow points. And you might ask, Richie, why are there so few arrow points? For one reason is you don't always need stone projectile points. We've got these 3 really long wooden tipped foreshafts, again, 800 and 1,000 years old. We also have, this is a little past this time group that I talked about. This is part of a bow where you construct a bow and you shape it and you figure out it's the right size and weight distribution, and sometimes you'll cut off ends. But you also got to remember that John Cowles was using 1/4-inch screen. And so a lot of these little teeny tiny arrow points went through his screen. And when at the Conley Caves was excavated in the 60s by an archaeologist who also used a 1/4-inch screen. And the thing we have found the most in his back dirt are arrow points, because they were falling through the screen. And so I'm going to guess that at Cougar Mountain Cave in the back dirt, there are many arrow points. Okay. To conclude, what have we learned from all of this work? Well, first and foremost, there's this really dynamic history of perishable technologies, of fiber, of wood use, plant gathering, plant processing, hunting, weapons manufacture, weapons maintenance. All of this is represented in variable forms and frequencies all through this time. And it gives these really, as I put it here, extremely rare diachronic windows. So these are just details and like examples of this technology in the past that we almost never have. And I think that's one of the big things that Cougar Mountain Cave can contribute. Back to our original research question. So what is the chronology of the site? We generally have repeated but varied visits between about 12,600 and 500 years ago. I told you that at the beginning. There's a pretty much a total hiatus between about 7,400 and 6,400 years ago. And that pattern is really repeated at Northern Great Basin rock shelters over and over and over and over again. And the old idea used to be that, this is it's called the Middle Holocene. It's one of the driest periods in the last 20,000 years. And the idea used to be, people just abandoned the Great Basin because it was so dry. And we've since figured out that that's not right. People were definitely still here. It's just that they changed where they were on the landscape because there was less water. And so I think this hiatus in rock shelter use is related to where the water's at and relative to where the rock shelters are. And it plays out at Cougar Mountain Cave. We're not quite done. There's still some cordage to radiocarbon date, but I think with one more trip, we can get it all sampled and we'll have a complete record. And there's a lot more research to do with any good research project. We answer one question and that gives you 25 more to investigate. And for instance, we're going to kind of compare the peaks and troughs to other sites like Conley Caves and Paisley Caves and Fort Rock Cave and other sites in the Fort Rock Basin with the paleoenvironmental record, climatic changes, and to really just use this record to give us a new look at all of our old ideas and to generate some new ones. Have a lot of people to thank, especially our funding, because lots of radiocarbon dating is expensive. So thanks to our Artesia Archaeological Research Fund, the Archaeological Society of Central Oregon, the AMARCs of Nevada, DRI, and thank all of you for being here tonight and listening to me.
And this guy's name is Richie?
I think we're going to do some questions now. Okay, and I'm going to repeat them. I think I need to repeat them for people online. So, yeah.
Yeah, Richie, when you talk about this collection and we're going to go sample it, Tell us how the collection got from Cowles to wherever it is.
Oh yeah, I skipped that detail. Sorry. Yes, so it was in John Cowles' hands until the 1980s when he passed away, and then it was transferred to the Fayetteville Museum in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Sorry, totally skipped over that. It's just second. It's just like my name to me. But yeah, so it's in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and it was not really able. Researchers weren't really able to access it until recently, and we've really started to work with them. I'm really grateful to the Fayetteville. They've been super awesome, and we're going back in May to do some more. So, and you can go down and see that whole collection, and that is it's something I didn't point out too. It's really great about this collection is it's still all together. You know, most stuff gets spread to the winds. So, yeah, Virginia.
She seems to be talking when the thing is coming out of.
Chest size pieces of.
He's got to repeat the question.
Was he interested in the baskets? I mean, like, how? I'm just really impressed with the scale.
These are fun meetings to go to.
But the other question is this land federal land or in
John Williams, you should mute your microphone. We can hear you.
in a private museum? Has there been some debate about who is the who should have that?
So the first question, well, I'll go with your second question because it's easier to answer. Is the site on federal property? No, the site is on private property, and it has always been on private hands. So yes. And the second question is, you were impressed by the fact that John Cowles collected lots of little stuff, and why? And based on his notes and or his correspondence with Tom Layton and then what he says in the book, I mean, I don't think he had any real rhyme or reason to anything he was doing besides he kept things that were interesting. And I've been in contact with one of his family members. He has a niece that's still alive here and lives in Portland. And she talks about Uncle John and how he just really liked showing his stuff off when the family would come by. So I don't really have an answer besides I think he just kept what he thought was interesting. But he didn't. He says in his book, I kept the most complete items from each level, and it filled up all of these things that you saw tonight, right? And so, yeah, I mean, Tom Layton went back and screened his back dirt and found a few pieces of cordage and some basketry, and that's at the Nevada State Museum. And that 2019 paper I talked about, I went and found those pieces and sampled them. And at the time, it was this little piece of cordage that he found, and we radiocarbon dated it, and it was the third oldest piece of cordage in the Western Hemisphere, right? And it was just this little piece that he left. Since we've dated a bunch more, and that's not really the case, but just an example of just going back to Cougar Mountain Cave to the back dirt would be a worthwhile endeavor, and hopefully we will one day. Yeah. So the question is there any rock art in the region? Yeah, I mean, there's tons of rock art all over the Fort Rock Basin. I mean, a place called Picture Rock Pass is,
Yeah, we've been there. And we
I don't
didn't
know
see
exactly how far, but it's the border between the Fort Rock and the Chihuacan Basin. And so, I mean, on the caves themselves, there's no rock art that I'm aware of. And on the mountain, I don't think there's any rock art, but sure. Yeah, there's lots of rock art in the Fort Rock Basin. Bill Cannon has documented tons of it. He's done a fantastic job. Yeah.
So there's evidence of the bison at the site. What other fauna were discovered? That didn't seem to be discussed in your presentation.
Great question. So the question is, what other sorts of fauna are at the site? Well, one thing I didn't have in there was also a mountain sheep horn sheath. So it was a female mountain sheep horn sheath that's, I think, 9,800 years old. And those are just the things that Cowles kept. And I think they were, he kept a bunch of bison teeth. I think there's an eagle talon. It's never really been assessed. He kept just kind of this hodgepodge of fauna remains that were pretty interesting to him. There's some elk teeth. If you guys know, elk have 2 teeth that are ivory. And so he found several of those and kept them. And then at the Nevada State Museum, when Tom Layton went back, they collected a ton of bones, and I only really got to briefly look at them. And there's lots of elk, there's lots of deer, more bison, probably some domestic cow, but I'm sure that there's all sorts of there's tons of probably god awful amounts of rabbits. Great Basin peoples love rabbits. So we don't really know for sure, and that hopefully one day we'll work with the Nevada State Museum collection to figure that out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ken.
Were there any coprolites?
Great question, Ken. Ken asked if there were any coprolites. In his book, he talks about there being animal dung at all levels of the cave. And so I'm going to guess that some of those animal dung were human coprolites as well, but he didn't keep any of them. So yes, but sadly, we might never know. That could be preserved in the back dirt though. So, and coprolites are poop, if you don't know. Yeah.
David Minnick has a question.
Yeah, David.
There's a question
Oh,
from the
from-
chat.
yeah.
You mentioned thinking that bison bones were culturally modified. What did you see to lead you to this conclusion?
Well, I mean, nothing other than it's more parsimonious to me that those bison bones were brought into the cave instead of bison stumbling into this cave in a midst of stone tools and debitage and dying, and then their bones getting broken open. So I can't say for sure, but they're all fragments. Yeah, I don't know. So I could be wrong.
There's another question. What time of year and season do you think
I don't know.
people visiting Cougar Mountain, and do these times of
If you're
year and
done,
season correlate with materials and
That's
dates
interesting.
from Conley and Fort Rock? Do you think people were using these caves simultaneously?
So the question's about times of the year when people are coming and how they correlate to other sites. And I mean, the short answer is I don't really know. We don't know because that sort of information is generated through much more detailed archaeological research. So mapping things in space, looking at the botany in hearth features, or having full animal profiles of like, is there baby deer here? Are there baby bison here? So that sort of information is really detailed and needs modern archaeological methods. So we don't know for sure. My guess would be different seasons at different times in the past. We know people were at Conley Caves in the fall, based on some plant remains and some other contextual information. So I'm going to guess in the late Pleistocene, there were some fall time visits. All that basketry and stuff, if they are using it to collect plants, most of that stuff seeds in the midsummer to late summer. Hunting could happen at any time of the year if you're using it as a stopover. So the answer is I don't know, but probably everything. Yeah.
On the slide, you had image that back to even was doubled over an object.
Which one are you talking about? Well, I guess so. The question is, there was a piece of cordage doubled over, and have we x-rayed the object? So the answer is no, we have not x-rayed the object, but we should do that. And there was actually another thing that I don't have a picture of. It's pretty old. It's either a fish bone. We all debated it was like fish bone, or it's leather. It's just bone, and it's wrapped in sagebrush. We don't know what that is yet either. So no, that would just take some effort to get it out of the museum and x-ray it. And I guess you guys did see that one x-ray of the Elko Point, right? And Tom Layton did that in the 60s. He had his dentist do that. And Tom, being Tom Layton, had the actual prints at his house and was like, here you go. Awesome. Thanks, Tom. I can't believe you did this. This is amazing.
Your first excavator, was there any evidence of looting on the site, or has it been extensively looted?
Good question. So he said, other than the first guy, was there evidence of looting, and is there lots of looting? Well, John Cowles says that he says he has this like really particular words he says, but basically he says it doesn't look like there'd been much digging at the site prior to his visits. And so based on all the stuff that he found, I think he was probably right. And he dug out the whole interior of the cave. And Tom Layton kind of confirmed that when he went back. But it's on private property now. And so, it's been actually relatively well protected. I think we know of a guy named Hal Bergen who dug there in the mid 60s, I think, after Layton. He has some notes that he donated, and I think I have an idea of where he probably dug, but we don't know for sure. So there has been looting other than Cowles, but Cowles did most of it. And I think the fact that he was so extensive that a lot of people haven't tried to go back. Yeah, go ahead.
Have they tried to go down?
Yeah. So the question is, has anyone tried to go down deeper? Could there be things? Have they gone to bedrock? And Tom Layton was the only person who's excavated there since, because it's on private property. And they dug down to the beach gravels, which would have been the Pleistocene lake. We don't know exactly when, but sometime before 13,000, probably after 18,000. And I guess the answer is no, no one has looked, but I highly doubt there would be, because the forces of the lake probably would have removed anything earlier. And that cave, Cougar Mountain, Fort Rock, and Conley were all formed by a pluvial lake in the late Pleistocene. They're all actually at the same elevation, 1365 meters. So maybe, but I feel like it's probably pretty unlikely. Yeah. Were there any burials? Yes, that's pretty confidential information, but there's various burial sites all around that are really special to the
There
Native
are
people. And we
various
try to really
burial
respect them.
sites all around.
Has there been any investigation of
But they keep it
Good.
Yeah, so the question is, any investigations on the stone tools and the napping debris and stuff? So we've mostly just done the obsidian sourcing, which tells us where they got the raw obsidian from to make their stuff. And we haven't done extensive stone tool research yet. We wanted to focus on all the radiocarbon dating yet, but don't worry, Dan and I are going to. We were looking at pictures before we came here and we're like, oh man, I can't wait to go back. And I recently, like, something I didn't show too is with all those hasket points in the bottom, there's these really big bifaces that are production hasket bifaces. And so we, unfortunately, all the debitage is mixed up. So all the flakes, we can't use any of that, and nor do we have it. But if we were to ever go back, we would definitely recover a lot of flaking debris and understand. And because it's an obsidian source, there's a lot of initial quarrying happening, almost certainly, and then lots of production and discard as well.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up question as well. If need be, would you guys ever have?
No, because John Cowles didn't keep it. And so, yeah, he didn't keep it. And it's all in the back dirt. So there's 12,000 years that are all mixed up in the back dirt. So, yeah. But that's going to be part of my dissertation, is to at least we're going to do more with the hasket points and compare them, because it's so similar to Conley Caves and the stories are so connected.
But you have debitage.
Yeah, exactly. And we have lots of debitage at Conley. Tens of thousands of pieces. Yes. Yeah.
Was his last residence in Columbia County?
Wherever Rainier is.
Okay, yeah, I remember. I heard about that grind still.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah. And
Do you have some too?
no.
You've got slides?
I think his thing still. I remember.
It might be.
Absolutely flabbergasted, because I live in Columbia County.
Gotcha.
And I do know some people. There's people. There was like they had them write an essay, and whoever wrote the best essay got some of the collection, and it was a big frame of I think maybe a sandal and some of the
Oh wow.
material, the textile material.
That's too bad.
But I heard that the collection had been bought up by the Rock Gem and Mineral Club.
I don't know anything about that.
Oh,
No.
you don't know anything about that, because I was wondering if that collection had been turned over to you yet. So I know
Oh.
people that have it, so I could get in touch with them. They were affiliated with the Grace Rock Museum. Does anybody go there? And his name was it started with a T and it was a hard name to pronounce. He was the one that had bought it, I guess, and I just wondered whatever happened to that collection.
I have no idea. I don't know the specifics of how the Cougar Mountain Cave collection got to the Fayetteville, but it all went at one point, and I'm pretty sure that Cal's had a lot more than just Cougar Mountain Cave. So it could be other things. It could be his relatives. I don't know. Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. And we will see you next month.